And I thought they were looking.
You know what? I was looking at that site we have type in the special session where they're going to get the price on just taking the whole part of it as
I
opposed
about
to
had him.
the entire lot. And so I literally walked around down there.
Well, I knew, in my own mind,
Now I'm in favor.
somebody
Thank goodness.
locally that lives, you know,
We don't get a chance, and it's like right smack dab,
belongs in the area, that
right by our.
I'd be the owner, but then I was wrong.
They took a polygraph.
Well, why can't we, there's already, I like the little parking lot that's next to it, the ones that, have both side things on them. I think, I'd be okay with that parking, attractive. And then we
6
had-
o'clock.
But I don't really see the point.
Let's call this meeting to order. Notice of an open work session to the City Council of North Kansas City, Missouri, August 21, 2018. Park Management Plan.
Thank you, sir. Just real quick before I turn things over to our Community Development Director, Sarah Copeland. So we do have the ribbon cutting, which is scheduled immediately after your work session tonight, or around sometime after around 6:40. And Mayor had asked that we have the Metroflex bus come to transport anybody who would like to be transported up there. That'll be coming about 6:35. And if you're not done with this topic, please don't feel like you have to rush, but I just thought I'd let you know that. And then the intention would be after we've done some quick picture taking up at the ribbon cutting to come on back for the regular session. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Community Development Director, Sarah Copeland.
I know you all want to talk about parking for hours.
Move to adjourn. Ain't gonna happen.
So I did, after we put the draft of the parking management plan in your packet on Thursday, we continued to work on it, mainly the introductory materials and then the last page. So there's an updated version of this in front of you for tonight and on the screen as well. Our goal tonight is to go through the draft recommendations here and get your feedback so that we can revise as appropriate as you direct and bring a final version of this back to you for adoption. So if there are recommendations in here that aren't clear or that you'd like us to revise or things that you think are missing, now's the time when we really want your feedback so that we can get a final draft to you that you are very comfortable with and it contains everything that you think it needs to contain. We have been working on this really since last November when we started doing a parking inventory and counting every single parking space that we have in downtown, and also doing some opinion surveys of both people who are coming to downtown and downtown business owners. And we have a lot of information that we use to kind of build the rest of this study. And I'm not going to go through it all. That will be an appendix to the parking management plan because it is quite detailed. But if you have detailed questions about that, we can definitely get into that. What I really want to focus on is the recommendations contained in the plan. But to do that, we want to kind of go through a little bit of that background just so that we're all on the same page. See if I can go to the next page. So we intend this to be an appendix to our overall city master plan and to the Armour Road Complete Street Plan, which identified doing a parking management study as one of its implementation steps. And in putting this plan together, we did our online surveys. We had 398 responses from people who visit downtown and also 53 responses from downtown business owners to the 2 surveys that we did in November and December. We held focus groups in February to talk more specifically about the data that we had collected and get feedback and ideas for management strategies. And then we had a community workshop on May 31st to present strategies to the public and get their feedback on those. We have 3 goals for this management plan. Goal number 1 is to build on downtown's welcoming and inviting character. People love downtown North Kansas City. Let's make sure that anything we're doing continues to build on what people like about downtown North Kansas City. Goal number 2 is to balance parking with places for people. And we don't want to just have parking everywhere and get rid of the destinations that people love. And goal number 3 is just to make it easier for people to find that downtown parking space. One of the things we discovered was that we do have a lot of parking spaces and not all of them are well used. So can we help people find those unused parking spaces as they're coming to downtown? Feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions or concerns. So, go to the next page. The parking situation, the parking landscape. We have 2,397 total parking spaces in downtown. And when we counted these, this does not include the parking spaces for the bowling alley, and it does not include the 795 parking spaces at 18th and Howell in that big block that's mainly used right now by the security company and Dairy Queen. It does not include that block. So there are a lot of parking spaces close to downtown not included in this number. So 2,397 total parking spaces. Of those, we have about a third that are public parking spaces that are, about 7% of those are the angled on-street parking spaces on Armour and Swift. There are 196 of those.
Sarah, for the public, would you mind letting them know what you consider downtown parking?
Okay, so what do we consider downtown? If you go back and look at this map of the parking inventory, downtown we started out by drawing a box of 21st Avenue to Burlington down to just south of 18th. So we wanted to include like Chicken and Pickle and the city-owned lot at 18th and Swift. So just south of those of 18th Avenue. And then over to Howell and north to 21st. That's the box we started out with. And then we took out the bowling alley. We took out the lot between Fayette and Howell south of Armour that had the 795 parking spaces in it. So that's what we ended up with. We have kind of a zigzag on that southeast corner, but mainly 21st to just south of 18th, Burlington to Howell. So of the 2,397 parking spaces, 196 of them are the angled on-street parking spaces on Armour and Swift, those key, most desirable parking spaces. There are another total, including those angled, we have 962 spaces downtown that are public. And that includes the angled parking. It includes all other on-street parking. So we have a lot of parallel parking spaces on the street, like right out here next to Dag Park or on the north side of 21st Avenue. And it includes our public parking lots. So the parking lot here at City Hall, the parking lot at 18th and Swift, and the parking lot that we own on Erie. So there are another, the rest of these are all privately owned parking spaces. 56% of all of the parking in downtown is privately owned. Yes, Mayor.
Have we made any effort to reach out to these private lots and make any kind of an arrangement like we did with NT Realty?
I will get to that.
Okay.
We absolutely. We'll get to that in just a little bit. So of those 2,397 parking spaces, then as we were doing the inventory, the question was how many of them are used? So when you think about efficiency of parking lots, the sweet spot for parking efficiency is 85%. You want your parking spaces to be 85% full. That means that you still have spaces open for people who are arriving to find a place to park, but you don't have spaces that are wasted by never being parked in, where you've striped them off and they're never getting used. So you want to hit 85% is parking lot efficiency. We found peak demand for parking in downtown. We were counting parking in the morning, parking at lunchtime, parking in the evening. We did this in November. We did it again in May. We're considering whether we should do it again in September. Peak parking usage in downtown happens over the lunch hour, which is probably not a surprise. Peak parking is 52% full. So we are falling well short of the 85% for parking efficiency. On-street angled parking is the most used. It gets the most full. We have blocks of angled parking that are at 100% full at noon. But we also have areas that never get even to a quarter full at that peak hour. So we've got, there are pockets where parking is very well used and pockets where parking is almost never used. And if you look, it's interesting to compare lunchtime with the 5 to 7 hour. At 5 to 7, parking at 18th and Clay is crazy, but everywhere else in downtown it's almost empty. And it falls quite a bit. And we assume that this is when office parkers are going home. So they're emptying out, like the Hillsburg lots, those are emptying out, and people are coming to Chicken Pickle for happy hour, and our parking lot at 18th and Swift gets pretty full. But overall, if you look at how much floor area we have for buildings in downtown and how much parking we have at our peak hours, we could probably double the amount of development we have in downtown and have enough parking overall to accommodate all of that space. We would definitely have spaces that, we were maybe a little short and other places where it's a little empty, but we could accommodate a lot more development than we have with the parking that we have now in downtown. So if you look, and going back to the idea of the angled parking, even our angled parking at our peak hour is not completely full. The parking spaces immediately in front of Chapels and Jersey Boys and Aunt Mary's, those get completely full. And the parking up near Kelso's, that gets pretty full. But if you look at the angled spaces further west, we have areas where, there are angled spaces that are vacant. Now, partly that may be that there are no tenants right now in the Jim's Tire building over at Buchanan and Armour, but still, we have available parking even at our peak hour. So as we were thinking about, what, recommendations for parking, that was definitely in the back of our minds, is that there is parking within a block of every business downtown, even at peak parking times. So when you look at our parking survey, that kind of backed up the idea that, yes, there's parking available. We asked people how they typically arrive downtown. Most people drive by themselves. We asked them how convenient they found downtown parking. If you, and this is just a quick overview, overwhelmingly people are telling us that parking is either very convenient or somewhat convenient. Almost half of all people responding to our survey said that downtown parking was less convenient than some areas, but not bad, and a quarter said it's convenient and easy to find. So, overall, that's pretty good. Only 3% of people, 12 people, told us that it was a deterrent to visiting downtown North Kansas City. And nearly 70%, 69.2% of respondents said that they find a parking space by either driving right to it or by circling the block once, which doesn't sound too bad. It's interesting that downtown business owners have a more negative perception of how convenient people, it's very different. We have 75% of people telling us when they visit downtown it's somewhat or very convenient. Business owners think that it's only 45%. So we kind of have a perception problem between those two groups, which is kind of interesting. We also asked the business owners specifically, we asked them to choose improvements related to parking that would benefit their businesses. And we had a long list, and choose all of the ones that you think would benefit your business. The number one response, 43%, said more off-street parking spaces. The second most popular answer, 30%, said improved signage would benefit their business. Third most popular was more turnover of parking spaces. And the fourth most popular answer, 21%, said no changes are necessary. So that's our background information for the draft recommendations. Any questions at this point?
Is that not kind of standard to see, though, a difference between what the community thinks and what business owners' perception is?
Our thought is that, if you have a negative experience, you're more likely to complain about it than if you have a positive experience, you're probably not saying much about it. So I guess it's not really a surprise, maybe a little bit, but it makes sense that they're just hearing complaints and not compliments if the parking is mostly public parking. So parking management recommendations. We presented a lot of recommendations to the public on May 31st and asked for their feedback on whether they thought these strategies accomplished our 3 goals, to help us prioritize which of these strategies would be a higher priority or a lower priority. And based on feedback from that meeting, we eliminated 4 strategies from our list of recommendations. One was to build a public parking garage. Reaction to this was pretty negative, and we were kind of surprised by how negative it was. When we asked people identify your lowest priority strategy, build a public parking garage was the winner for low priority. And we think this is probably a combination of our existing parking spaces are half full at peak time, and parking garages are really expensive. We do think that there's a policy consideration that we'll get to a little later related to this, but public was not very keen on building a public parking garage. People are also not excited about parking meters, which makes sense. They weren't excited about adding more parking enforcement as like a parking enforcement officer. And strangely, they weren't that interested in more maps showing where downtown parking was. Since we did that, you know, River North has launched their website. The Business Council is doing more with their destination attractions website. So we think there's an opportunity for us to partner with them to help people know where to park instead of needing to take that on ourselves. So what are the draft recommendations? We're going to present these in the order that the public prioritized them, so the ones that were most popular with the public to the least popular. Wayfinding signage was definitely a key recommendation that the public really liked. We do have this budgeted to start adding some of these, but this was a key, you know, help people find the public parking lots that are available to them. And related to this, public parking lot signage was another top priority for people to help identify where we have public parking lots around town, like 18th and Swift and on Erie. The third one, Mayor, getting to your question, was to expand public-private partnerships. So we currently have one parking lot where we have a license agreement with Northtown DevCo to allow public parking in the evenings and on the weekends. So there was a lot of interest in continuing to open up privately owned parking areas for public parking in some capacity. And I think there are some areas where we could continue to do this. We have not pushed hard on doing that quite yet, but you know, there are a couple where I think that we have some opportunities to continue to reach out to property owners to do that. So, and I think that there is some interest on the part of property owners to possibly partner with us on this as well. So definitely something that was of interest to the public. One thing, yes, Mayor.
Do we have any movement on this new parking lot, the paved parking lot that they were talking about just north of the Chicken and Pickle there?
We have not received anything from them. We've provided information. The next step is for them to submit an application to us, and we haven't received anything yet and haven't heard anything from them in a few months. Yes?
Signage on the public-private partnerships. Like the sign we have now on the 18th and, not 18th, what is that? The one you were just referring to. It's the biggest thing on that sign right now is a tow truck.
Yeah, so we'll get to that too in just a minute. That's definitely a key. Yeah, I agree with where you're going there. One of the things that we did not ask people about at the May 31st meeting, but we think is important to include in our management strategies is accessible parking. We have a real lack of accessible parking in downtown, particularly our on-street parking spaces. And this is something that we really do need to address as we move forward in looking at our downtown parking. We did ask in our November parking opinion survey, we asked people, have you ever used accessible parking? Because some people have, you know, the accessible parking tag that they use all the time. Some people, if you break your leg and you're on crutches for a while, you're going to have a temporary accessible parking tag. We have limited spaces for those people. So we asked, have you ever used accessible parking? And if people had said yes, we asked them what they thought about accessible parking downtown. And the reaction was pretty much, there's not enough. There needs to be more. So one of the things, our parking requirements in the zoning ordinance require a certain amount of accessible parking. We are not meeting that general standard for on-street parking. So we are recommending that we add accessible parking spaces as we make streetscape improvements downtown, and that this should be a high priority for us moving forward. So there's some information in here about accessible parking. We had provided to council, this is a work session a couple of years ago, some thoughts on accessible parking, and what we're recommending is moving forward with some of those recommendations. Improve the downtown streetscape was one of the strategies that we presented that people were generally interested in. We have planned to kind of refresh our downtown, but this is a way that we could kind of combine this with accessible parking to where we need to add curb ramps to accessible parking spaces. We could do that as part of a general refresh of our downtown streetscape. and this scored pretty well. We found in asking the opinion survey that people are willing to walk 1 to 2 to 3 blocks from a parking space to a destination. We want to make sure that that's a comfortable and safe walk for people so that we can get them to follow through on what they say they're willing to do, particularly if you're making, you know, more than one stop in downtown. That's a real opportunity. Also an opportunity to support some of our downtown businesses who are interested in doing more sidewalk dining or just having more seating areas adjacent to their businesses. Another strategy was to add bike parking. This is where we started to see kind of a drop off in higher priorities to medium priorities, is to add bike parking. We don't have a lot of bike parking in downtown. If we can convince 8% of people right now are either walking, biking, or using transit to get to downtown. If we could increase that percentage just a little bit, that would help decrease the number of cars we need to provide parking spaces for. So looking at supporting people who, you know, maybe they live up in Northgate and they can bike downtown instead of driving, that would be great. Those bikes take up a little less space, and we can put them in other locations. So this is another opportunity for us to.
Sarah, how are you
Yes.
going to encourage somebody to walk?
Well, part of it gets back to improving our downtown streetscape. We have a few spots in downtown where we're missing sidewalk, so I think we need to look at where we have some strategic sidewalk gaps to fill on the streets off of Armour and off of Swift. So there are a few of those. And, you know, part of it too is just things that you do to encourage people to bike are also related to pedestrian improvements. So I think those kind of go hand in hand. So as we look at updating our streetscape, we're adding benches, or, you know, the landscaping is inviting. There's some of that, and some of it is kind of a PR for downtown. Hey, you can walk to downtown from Northgate. So I think there are a variety of things, and some of it gets back into, you know, PR. It's not that far of a walk. That sort
What
of
was
thing.
the main objection that people had toward a public parking garage? Was it financially? Did they think their taxes would go up, or was the location someplace farther out that they couldn't?
We didn't dive into that a whole lot, so I can't really answer that question. You know, as I said earlier, I think it's a combination of our existing parking is only half full, and it is really expensive. It's about $25,000 per space to build structured parking.
That person who didn't like it, didn't like it because they'd have to pay for it? I wanted to know why.
I can't answer that question.
They can't answer. They just said they didn't like public parking.
Well, I would
It's not
say
just one person.
it wasn't just one
I've
person.
heard people say it's ugly. I mean, it's just an ugly addition to your downtown.
Okay, but the question wasn't asked, so we don't really know what the question was.
I mean, I can say when I've asked that question, those are the answers I get in North Kansas City, is that it's ugly, that they don't want it in downtown.
But it was, I mean, that and parking meters were the two things
I
that
can
people
understand parking meters.
identified as their lowest priority, and parking garage was the #1 low priority.
I had another question. Did you ask CVS about their problem that they have when you poll some of the businesses?
We did not get into, do you
Okay.
have, because we also have downtown business owners who don't own any off-street parking, so we didn't get into their own.
I think I had
parking
brought
maintenance.
this up at one meeting about the problem that they have, because they had constantly have a problem with Christine's Firehouse at the lunchtime. And they have employees that can't find a place to park at lunchtime. I suggested that they tow cars or have a guard out there, or mark tires or whatever. At that time, they were kind of reluctant because they were afraid that they might be, quote, driving off customers because they had a hard-nosed action. But, you know, there's a 75 car, if they did that, which they're thinking about doing, towing cars, if they did that, you're going to throw many, many, many cars out on the street to park somewhere.
What's interesting is that if you look at that block during our peak hour of lunchtime, the on-street parking immediately adjacent to CVS is not completely full.
That's fine, but that's because people want to walk from 10 feet rather than a block.
Well, the on-street parking is actually closer to their front door than their parking lot.
Then why is everybody parking in the parking lot?
I don't know. But there is still parking capacity immediately around CVS.
I don't know what you're going to do. It's a problem.
It's hard to get out of those parking places. That's why people park in that lot, because then they don't have to wait for traffic to go by.
Yeah, they just walk
They-
right across.
They
the
walk
street.
right, it's a matter of convenience, and it's hard to get your
So
vehicle
if
out.
CVS does what they should do and kick those people out, you're gonna have a problem, I think.
But we have the capacity to absorb that in that block. So it's a problem for CVS, but that doesn't mean that it's a problem for downtown as a whole,
We'll see.
because we have capacity at peak hour. And then off the peak hour, we have a lot of parking immediately adjacent to that
I'm
block.
sure you do. Well, peak hours, yeah.
So that was add bike parking. Another medium priority strategy is to expand bike routes. Again, I'm sorry, Mary. Yes.
Have you been over town and seen all these scooters running around?
Yes.
I mean, that looks to me like that's gonna be the coming thing. I
They've
mean,
been kicked out of the plaza.
well, yeah, but I mean, I was over in the River Key and good grief, they were everywhere over there.
I was kind of thinking we should have a work session at some point on those scooters. So, like, I have a lot of questions about those outside of this meeting. Like the usage of them, the contracts, where, you know, what
Well,
happens
we're
to
working on
them,
an agreement that's to some degree based upon Kansas City's that they've just entered into that we are going to be bringing to council pretty soon. We're just in the review stage now, so it will be before you shortly for discussion, and we'll have a recommended agreement with the scooter company and also with Lime Bicycle and anybody else of the similar nature who might come. But we will be bringing that to you here
Okay.
probably in the next, maybe meeting after next would be
There's
my
some pros and cons about it, you know, before we would get into an agreement. There's just a lot of questions I have and that I've had working in downtown Kansas City about the scooters and their locations and because they're dockless, you know, where they are left. And so I'd like to talk about that
Okay.
at some point.
They look like a lot of fun.
My daughter wants to
Yeah.
ride one, but apparently you have to be 18 and older to,
They look like they're really fun.
yeah, and they say wear a helmet. Of course, no one wears a helmet. And
Well,
My
I
kids
think
have been
Westport was afraid somebody drunk would
Yeah.
kill somebody on
When you talked about the bicycle parking, is in most cities, is that normally business owned or city owned?
It could be both.
Okay.
I think that we do not have a lot of bike racks downtown. We have one here. Velo Garage has one way down at 14th. There's not a lot immediately around here, and I think that we would benefit by adding some to, you know, and also could potentially help keep some of those bikes maybe more where we want them and not so they're knocking down the mayor in front of Lamont.
that would be good.
So expand bike routes is another. We are anticipating that we will receive our grant funds to do a bike master plan next year to look at how can we support people coming downtown, not in their cars. So that would be another one. Coming back to your question, Councilmember DeLong, about this parking lot signage, one of the recommendations is to establish a standard sign for private lots that are available to the public. Either, you know, we have a license agreement with the property owner, or they're just making them available to the public that identify, you know, that makes it clear to drivers, yes, you can park here, and this is when you can park here. And so the thing you don't see at the top of the sign is a big tow truck. Because I agree, if you don't have the time to look at that sign, you're not going to know that you can park there.
Even if you stop, it's still hard to read because
Yes.
the fine prints.
So that's one of our recommendations is as we are putting up the wayfinding signage to also design something that we could make the design available for people to erect, and potentially as we are entering license agreements, requiring people to put these signs up on parking lots that are available to the public through a license agreement. This, you know, got a medium priority score as we asked people to prioritize things, but we think could do a lot of good as a short-term strategy.
I like that. Have you seen Chicken and Pickle's new one?
Yeah,
That would be
it's
good.
very clear.
That's very clear. No question.
Exactly. And that if they all look the same, that will help people as they're driving around downtown know, oh, yes, I recognize this sign. Getting to the things that people were not as excited about, but staff is supportive of, one of the things we think we need to look at is modifying parking time limits. A lot of our parking is 2-hour parking, but we also have a little piece of 30-minute parking and 3-hour parking. And we have parking restrictions way down between 12th and 13th Avenues. So we think we need to consider where we want to focus the time and attention of our parking enforcement officer, and where we do think it's important to have parking restrictions. This gets back to the issue of turnover, which was a priority for downtown business owners, and to make sure that, you know, that those key short-term parking areas are in fact being used for short-term parking and not all-day parking. So this is going to be a key strategy as well. And then increasing our overtime parking fines. This was not a high priority for the public. More people identified this as a low priority than a high priority. But if we aren't enforcing parking tickets, then people know that they can just park in our key, most desirable parking spaces all day and they don't have to move. Our parking fines are $15. Much lower than any of our adjacent jurisdictions. Parkville charges $80. And we also know that we have a parking ticket payment problem. So we would like to do some further exploration of improving our enforcement of parking tickets and increasing the fine, so that this is a real deterrent to people parking in our angled parking spaces and staying all day.
Do we issue bench warrants for unpaid
We
parking
do not
tickets?
issue warrants on parking tickets.
Oh. Not that I've had any bench
And
warrants,
there,
but
that is a,
just
we don't
possibly
really,
that would be an option.
We don't really want to issue warrants on parking tickets, but I'll let Chief Beamer maybe say more about that.
The issue is, we know who owns the vehicle, but that doesn't necessarily, if you run your name, it comes back to Valerie Pierman, that I don't know your date of birth, I don't have any of the identifiers necessary to issue a warrant for you. So we do not issue warrants on parking violations. But one of the things that we're looking at is other types of enforcement other than a warrant. A lot of cities, especially East Coast cities, use what's known as the boot. You get too many tickets, we boot your vehicle, we impound your vehicle. We don't tow it, we just, you're not leaving with that boot on your wheel. Cities have had success with that. There's other devices of a similar nature that we can look at. I wouldn't necessarily say that we're going to boot a vehicle for one parking violation, but we've got people that we know have received multiple parking tickets and have not paid them. This would be a way to address that short of issuing a warrant for an individual and not making sure we have the right person.
This would come to council before we would do anything.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But it's one of the things that during the discussions that we talked about.
Well, I like more the carrot than the stick anyway, but I just think we should probably maybe look at those options.
So this is the last of the recommendations. There are a few parking policies that have kind of come up in some of our conversations and in the focus groups that we had. And one is that private development that's requesting public incentives related to building structured parking should be required to provide some public parking. Obviously, this hasn't happened yet, but we think that there's a possibility that in the future, as you know, some of our property might redevelop, if someone's going to ask us to help them economically in building something, they should be providing some level of public parking. Parking should be located behind buildings or otherwise screened to reduce its impact on the streetscape. This is something that we already do in the zoning regulations for our downtown zoning district, that we should minimize curb cuts that have an impact on the pedestrian experience, add sidewalk where it's missing. We're missing some sidewalk on Erie and Fayette and 18th Avenue. There are some gaps we should fill in, and that we should require bicycle parking and look at that as part of our updates in the zoning ordinance. So some parking policy ideas. So as we look at next steps with these strategies that we've laid out, we think step number one is not very exciting. It wasn't a high priority with the public, but we think it's important to update our parking enforcement measures. We need to do some additional research and work with the municipal court, but that would be a step one for us, is to update our time restrictions and our parking ticket fines and how we enforce those. Step number two, then, to improve our signage. We do have new signage budgeted, so to continue to move forward in helping people find those off-street parking areas. Step number three, updating our downtown streetscape, incorporate accessible parking improvements as we do that, and consider where we can fill in downtown sidewalk gaps. Then step 4, to continue to work to partner with private property owners, and not only to expand the licensed parking lots that we have, but also to get them to help us communicate with the public where they can park. And then step 5 would be to support transportation alternatives. So I know that we're like right up at 6:34. What I hope that you will tell us at this point is there anything in here that you have concerns about, that you want us to reconsider? Any feedback that you would have to help us revise this into a final version for your consideration on a future agenda?
I think you've done a great job of putting this together. This is a very complex issue. There's a lot of parts and pieces to it that have to be considered. To me, it looks like one of the main problems we're going to have is marketing the effort to make people more courteous and more intelligent about where they park and how they park, and not be selfish about taking spaces up and things. And that's a psychological thing that's way beyond me. So, but I think you're doing a great job on getting that, things started.
And right now, I can't say that I really am real big on increasing the fines on parking violations. However, I could see utilization of the booths.
I like the chief's option of the utilization of the booths. I think, though, I mean, our parking fines are the lowest out of a lot of the cities that we've been around. I mean, even increasing it $10, $15, I mean, I think we seriously need to look at that. I mean, people are abusing the system, it sounds like, so I think we should look at the fines.
Well, that may be, but when we're doing the priority items there's a real low priority for hiring more people to enforce these things. So if we're going to update parking enforcement measures, we're going to have more people out there enforcing them.
Well, part of our thinking was there wasn't a lot of priority to adding staff. So if we could focus the attention of our existing parking enforcement officer in where we really care about down, and that's one of the reasons why we want to look at, do we really need to enforce 2-hour parking between 12th and 13th Avenue? Or can we focus Terry's attention in downtown?
That's what I think is a good idea, because there's no point in being down there when downtown's all got people parking on top of each other, which I see every day.
And you could raise the fines $25 and you're not adding any more people.
Right.
Just making it a little bit more of a disincentive.
We don't want to drive people away that don't want to find out that they come over here to Northtown, that if they stay a few minutes over a cup of coffee, they get a boot when they get on there, when they go outside.
No.
On the other
This
hand,
is really focused on people who know that they're not going to get a ticket, or they know that they don't have to pay it, and nothing, they're not going to get a warrant issued. We figure if we get stricter about it, people will eventually, they'll talk and they'll know, oh, they mean it in North
it'll
Kansas
work
City.
itself out in the long run.
What's a cost-benefit analysis? Because $15, you could park in a parking garage all day, it would cost you more than $15, So why not just park on our street? And
Yeah, that's
ticket?
Okay, we ready?
Once you have after a certain time, you could give another $15 ticket, and then after a certain time, another one. So instead of, it's not just one $15 ticket in a day, it could be 2 or 3, which is $45. And there would be, you would think there'd be discretion on using a boot. You're not just going to go out and give a boot to anybody.
No.
But you have your repeat offenders. They would be the ones that you would target and zero in for the boot.
Exactly.
Eureka Springs had a block of concrete and a log chain.
That would be attractive downtown.
I'd only get booted one time, and that'd be it. I'd never want to be a violator again.
That'd be change your behavior.
Move to adjourn
Thanks.
then.
Move to adjourn. All in favor?
Thank you.
Aye.
Opposed?